The aim is to remove 20% of leached nitrogen by 2018. In this context, Mike is going to talk about what this means for farming a product on the shores of Lake Taupo.
Kia ora mai tātou. I ngā iwi o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. G'day everyone, and to the people of the land, greetings, thrice greetings. A couple of caveats before I start. This process has absolutely consumed me and Sharon for the last 8 or 9 years. I will attempt to talk objectively. I will attempt to talk using science and fact, but I will also be real. The other caveat is that I'm going to condense 12 years of social change into 20 minutes. In order to do that, I have to be fairly brutal with facts and I have to be blunt. I don't make any apologies for that. I'm going to talk about, first of all, the process that led to capping nitrogen emissions for farmers in the Taupo catchment, and I'm definitely going to talk from a farmer's perspective. I'm then going to do a Mike Barton analysis of the current farming business model as it applies to New Zealand, and then overlay that with some of the lessons from capping. And then I'm going to talk about Taupo beef, which emerges from that previous topic, and how it's worked for us. Firstly, the Taupo catchment. We have to accept that this is not a process of fixing a problem. This has been a process of stopping a problem starting. Taupo is one of the cleanest lakes in the world. The Seishi disk water clarity is some 15 metres or more. We are not trying to fix it up. That catchment map shows you the scale of the issue that we're talking about. All the stuff on the eastern side, that dark green, is production forestry. That land is owned by Tūwharetoa and was put into Pinus radiata predominantly in the 1960s. I remember as a boy on a fishing trip there, all that land being burnt prior to planting. Oops, pressed the wrong button. This land here, the Kaimanawa Forest Park, is predominantly native forest leading up to Tussock on the high country. Through here you have the Tongariro National Park, which is largely either tussock or denuded alpine country. There's been an addition to the catchment with the introduction of the Tongariro Power Scheme, where the Upper Wanganui River has been diverted into Lake Taupo. This lighter colour land, predominantly to the north and to the west of the catchment, is farmland. And you'll see from there that we're talking about only 20% of the catchment is in farmland. Some 55,000 hectares out of nearly 300,000 hectares. Most of the other catchments that you people are dealing with would have maybe 80% of the catchment in farmland, the complete reverse of these percentages. This is our farm. We're on the northwestern side of the lake, looking back across to Waitahanui, and out of shot to the left would be Taupo, and to the right, out of shot, is Turangi. You can see some white pegs in the ground. Our farm was the site of a 5-year program by AgResearch to look at whether or not it's possible to reduce emissions from a beef farming system under a nitrogen cap. That research is still being peer reviewed and has not yet been released. Those white posts represent some 1,000 underground collectors that were placed on 15 hectares of our land, in probably the largest farm-scale trial that AgResearch has undertaken into this issue. The quick farmer take of the results of that research is that there are no silver bullets. There might be the odd bit of silver buckshot, and we might be able to pick up the odd pellet. But we have to start getting real about this issue. The issue of water quality in relation to farming is one of stock urine, and so it's essentially a function of livestock numbers. You cannot get away from that issue. As farmers, we became aware of the issue in 2000. Farmers at the time, many of them had moved to the catchment because of the lake and because of their desire to farm. So the two things went hand in glove, protecting the lake but also protecting a viable farming business. An incorporated society was formed, Taupo Landcare, the acronym TLC. Someone had their thinking cap on when they did that. And we decided that we needed to represent all farmers in the catchment in our negotiations with, well, as it was called then, Environment Waikato. It's reverted to Waikato Regional Council. We also wanted to advocate for and participate in research. There was research in 2000 telling us what was happening to the lake, but much of that research had taken place on pumice land outside of the catchment. We've stuck together for that entire time and have represented about 97, 98% of the farmers. That totals 105 farms. To put that in perspective, roughly half the land farmed is owned by Māori incorporations, the other half under private European freehold title. This is what we had to get our heads around. Native forest, tussock, leaches around 3 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per annum. That's your ambient, steady-state nitrogen leaching in an unmodified catchment where you have pumice. The figures will be slightly different for other soil types, but you could assume that for any free-draining soil, and here you're probably talking about the Canterbury Plains and much of the central North Island, these figures will apply. Plantation forest. I mean, one of the things we wanted to believe was that all the pollen coming from pine trees was part of the problem. It wasn't farmers. The reality is that they leach no more than native trees and tussock. There is a spike when trees are milled, but then there's a deficit period as the new rotation of trees is planted and the canopy closes over. Sheep and beef farms, which are the predominant land use under farming, leach around about 17 kilograms, and this has been modelled using actual livestock figures through the benchmark years of 2001 to 2005. Dairy farms were leaching 55 kilograms plus. Put that in perspective, there are 4.5 dairy farms in the catchment at the moment, 0.5 being one farm that's half in, half out. We had to accept that we were contributing 93% of the manageable nitrogen into the catchment. We wanted to believe that it was all the urban settlements and the holiday batches with their septic tanks that were the problem, but they only contribute 7%. That first bullet point is we've now just, with the coming of March, it's now 12 years since this process started. 12 years in one sense is great. You get a lot of dialogue and you get everyone thrashing out the issues, but it's way too long for people to have to endure uncertainty. It's way too long for you to be unable to sell your farm, and it's the impact on family relationships is too brutal. What's happened is that land values are now defined by a nitrogen discharge allowance. We've all been assigned one under this legislation, and it's based on the best year of farming between 2001 and 2005. Landmass Technology, with a company employed by the Taupo District Council to assign rateable values to farmland in the catchment, and they have received a ruling from the Solicitor General that under the Ratings Act, you normally have to use land sales as a measure of land value. We've had very few land sales in the catchment. There have been nitrogen sales under the nitrogen market that we've created, and that was in a legal sense a proxy for land sales, and has now been we've basically been valued on that basis. So it's the first time in the history of New Zealand farmland is being valued almost directly in relation to its productive capacity. It's no longer valued from the point of view of someone being able to buy a farm and having a dream about what they can convert it into. So in other words, the potential of the land is now defined in perpetuity, and that really gets people thinking when they're buying land. Looking at the process, the very early stages were defined by science, but the latter stages were definitely driven by social and political imperatives. In other words, that's when the horse trading started, and really the rubber met the road. In 2007, 8 appellants, including Taupo Landcare, the farmer group, went to the Environment Court with Waikato Regional Council as the respondent. We settled during that process all but one issue. It forced us to talk even more than we had, but it's an aggressive, confrontational, incredibly expensive process. As I could not agree more with the Minister this morning, we have to get away from that. As farmers, we would have spent $500,000 in legal fees, spread amongst 100 farmers. I hate to think what the Regional Council spent, but it would be in the order of millions. The 7 other appellants would have done the same. That would have gone a long way to fixing some of the issues. So, the realities that we've had to accept. A nitrogen cap is in fact a cap on stock urine. So it's a de facto cap on stocking rates. So our farm is, unless we buy nitrogen to up our production, and I'll talk about that in a minute, our farm is capped in perpetuity at its stocking rate. Now, under that sort of a cap, you're essentially looking at an income cap. The prices that we've received, and I'll talk about this under my analysis of the farming business model, the prices that we've received as farmers have basically flatlined, except for the odd spike here and there, since 1984 when subsidies were removed. So a production cap is an income cap if you're going to stay in the commodity space as farmers. I modelled for the Environment Court 6 farms, took their actual figures. They range from a gentleman who was in his 60s with a very extensive farm. He bought the farm as a ballot farm in 1984 and was told by the government in 2000 that he was a polluter. So you can imagine the issues that he had to face. So we went from an extensive farm like that to a highly intensive operation that was run by the Central District's Share Milker of the Year. He had a Bachelor of Agricultural Science in Farm Management with honours. All of those farms would struggle to remain solvent and would be in a position where the banks would be seriously talking to them by year 9. The most aggressive farmer, the one with the most output, was really down the toilet by year 5. The extensive gentleman could last to year 9. We assumed 4% cost increases over the 10 years that we modelled those farms and static income. So we were very conservative in our modelling. The modelling was critiqued by Professor Anton Meister from Massey. He said that our assumptions were correct, our modelling was correct, that we had presented the worst case scenario, and I took that as a compliment because we felt that was our job. But the farmers were an inventive lot and we would come up with a solution. Maybe Taupo beef is the solution, but we're starting to get to the nub of what I consider to be a critical issue for this country, not just for farming. So I'm now a consented farmer. I am one of a rare species at the moment. There's only about 90 of us in existence, but very shortly many farms in this country will require a consent to farm. Many farmers have consents to discharge effluent and so on, but we're the first farmers to have a consent to actually farm. I have a nitrogen management plan in place and I will be audited annually. I face annual consent costs and monitoring costs. I need to point out that our farmers in the Taupo catchment are some of the most environmentally benign in the country. Dr. Stuart Ledgard presented evidence at the Environment Court to say that. We had no other options. We've done basically everything that Landcare stands for. Every single stream in the catchment was fenced off in 1982. We've had a Clean Streams Accord since then. I've just had the 5-minute card, so I'm going to have to get ripping along. So we're applying for a consent to limit our production in perpetuity. On the positive side, at least we know where we stand for the next 25 years. We've had to discontinue breeding cows because as a farmer now, I have to look at dollars profit earned per kilogram of nitrogen leached. Breeding cows are too inefficient. We've got to grow animals really fast and no second wintering. Spraying and cultivating with the consequent leaching of nitrogen is no longer an option. As I've said, we've had a Clean Streamed Accord. What I've learned is that perceived environmental impacts are going to define production limits for farmers in the future. I say perceived because we've accepted science around the lake issue that's still not defined and really finite. We've had to accept it's the best that we've got at the moment, but over time it may get challenged. Current farming business model, static returns for 25 years. These figures are from the Beef and Lamb Economic Service. Profit before tax in 1984 was $70 a hectare. 2007-2008 it was $13. That was a drought year. This year's is being touted as one of the best that farming has known in years. It's looking like about $45 a hectare. This is on Class 4 land in the central Waikato Bay of Plenty area, which describes all the land in Taupo and most of the land in the upper Waikato. You see what's happened to our costs. They've gone up in that time exponentially. I currently winter 3.5 cattle per hectare. In 84 or 85, I had 1.3. Farmers have taken up science-driven production increases in response to static returns. We've now reached the limit of that business model. I can't increase my production in order to stay ahead of rising costs. I am left with one option, to increase the returns I get from a static amount of product. So that's why we have Taupo beef. Over the last 5 years, I don't know how many people have told me you will not get consumers to pay a premium from an environmental perspective for food. I deliberately asked that question of people yesterday and both times they said no. When people tell me that someone won't do something, I suppose it gets me going, and that's why we set it up. What is Taupo beef? It's beef that's been certified by Waikato Regional Council as being grown under a catchment management plan that will protect the lake for the next 150 years. So we're talking about a multi-generational process, and the council was happy to do that. I'm still polluting, don't get me wrong, our farm still pollutes, but using a catchment-wide plan where 30% of the farmland is being shut down, we're okay. So think about, I'm okay as I'm growing beef, but think about the 30% of farms in the catchment that are being shut down by the Lake Taupo Protection Trust to remove that nitrogen from the lake. We're using Greenlee Premier Meats here in Hamilton to process our meat. It's radio frequency tracked. from 3 farms, so we can absolutely guarantee that the eye fillet that you have at Hooker Lodge or the Hilton Hotel in Taupo or all the other restaurants that serve it has come from either our farm or one of the other 2 participating farms. We've had to grow it and finish it really quickly because of the lake. The quid quo pro of that is that you get really high quality beef. We use Charolais Angus cross because they grow really fast, really quickly. The meat is aged for a minimum of 4 weeks and is sold at a significant premium. We ask the people marketing it to sell it at crazy prices to really try and see whether people would pay a premium. They have. One example, eye fillet dish at the Hilton, $38.50 is the price you would pay for a top-of-the-line meal. Time's up, okay. They were charging $42.50 for Taupo beef, and it was outselling the other product by 4 to 1. We ramped it up to $46. We started to get a bit of price resistance, but it was still way outselling the other product. We've had outstanding feedback from chefs and diners, and the demand exceeds our ability to supply. We need a business model that gets returns back to farmers. At the moment, the meat processing industry doesn't want to deal with this issue because it affects their efficiency and their effectiveness. I suspect much of the rhetoric around consumers not wishing to pay a premium is actually coming from the entrenched behaviour of our meat processing industries, and you could also apply that to dairying and elsewhere. So we can farm in a way that protects waterways, but you need to cap livestock numbers to do it. And basically, we're faced just as farmers, but as a nation, I believe we're faced with a question. Do we accept a cap on our income as a nation and as the real cost of protecting waterways? And by a cap on income, I'm also talking about, in many places, you're going to have to cut out a number of farms in those catchments. There is no other way around it. It's really nice to fence your waterways and do all those other things. But this is a function of livestock numbers. In any free-draining soil, you get rid of the fecal coliform and the phosphorus by riparian planting, but you do not get rid of nitrogen. So how many of you people are probably the most aware of the consumers that I'm likely to be selling to. How many of you people actively purchase food that has been grown in a way that protects water quality? Do you even ask for that when you go to the supermarket? Can I have a show of hands? Great, so we've got some. The reality is, as a nation, we need every consumer to do that. The debate so far has been framed around a contest between regional authorities and farmers. The consumer has been excluded from that process almost entirely. We need to change that. I believe you can extract a premium for produce produced in New Zealand, but we actually need to really start talking to each other about how we're going to do that, and it involves massive structural change in the way we farm, the way we process, the expectations we have as a nation of our income from farming. But I wonder, the meal we had last night, was it purchased with those things in mind? Maybe next time you have a conference you could look at those issues. I think that's enough from me.